Yo, what's going on? This is the NRW, where nerds rule the world. It's your boy, Kuya P, aka patrick.strange, the Adobro, the Babinka boy, the leader of the Hala Hala homies in the Cine gang of the ShoPowSho. And we are back again for another amazing episode, but I can't do this alone without the amazing Ates. But as you know, Kataphorric is in Japan, holding it down, educating the masses over there. So I do have fresh from the stuffy spa, Miss Viva Valentina. How are you, Tina?
Hi, Patrick. I'm doing all right. Yep. Fresh out the spa. Just came out of work.
Yeah. Well, it's great to see you. And I'm happy for those that don't know, we recently also, if you follow us on our IGs and stuff, we were at a wedding together recently. So I got to see Tina in person. We got to give a shout out to our favorite Philarican couple, to Lola and JC, who tied their nuptials. Super happy for them. But it was also great to see you.
Beautiful blending of cultures. It was one of the most beautiful weddings I've ever been to. And I am a veteran wedding guest. I have been doing weddings since I could walk.
Yes.
I am a classically trained flower girl. I am like the
bridesmaid.
I'm your wedding guest. I will come to your wedding. Yes.
You know what? I'm right there with you. I love weddings. You know, there might be a lot of other guys out there that aren't about it, but I will be there. And I've officiated 4 weddings.
Oh my God, I forgot about that. Yeah.
I've held it down. You know, I could put some words together.
Kuya P, y'all.
I love weddings. I love love. Love is beautiful. Love is what makes the world go round. But yes, so it was great to see you, Tina. But today we have another hot guest. I'm so excited. This is the reason why we do ShoPowSho, is for guests like this. We want to know more about our people and our culture all around the world. So coming out of the Philippines, I found out about this amazing creator through mutuals online on Twitter, I think exactly. Shout out to my recent one of our guests on ShoPowSho, Budget Tan, who's been on, Keith Sakat, just an amazing array of Filipino creators that are just around and out, and some that we may not be familiar with. And when this creator was suggested, I was like, let me check out some of his stuff, and amazing. And so let me just stop talking. Let's bring him on. We're going to learn a lot more. So again, I don't know too much about this cat, but I just know his stuff looks amazing. I want to know this guy. I want to be his friend. I want to be his kuya. So let's bring him on.
Dive in.
Let's bring him on in. There he goes. Paolo Chikiamco. There he is. Air horns now are going off, Paolo. I know you've seen the show, so not to deafen you. It's in post. You will have hearing so that your kids can now drive you crazy.
Oh, great. I don't get enough of that.
Well, Paolo, thank you so much for getting up early. I know it's very early in the Philippines. Thank you so much. I'm enamored by your work. And you've been well versed in Philippine mythology. I love it, man. And I'm a student now for you. I want to know. I need to be educated. But before we do that, we'll get into all of that. Shout out to you again with your Mythspace Ignition Kickstarter campaign. We just showed the video for that. It looks amazing. And I can't wait to know more about this. Actually, you know what? I forgot to insert it, didn't I? So you know what? This is what we're going to do now. As I did all of our introductions, I was originally going to throw it to that before I brought Paolo in here. So you know what, Paolo, why don't you bring it into your Kickstarter campaign, and then we'll come back with the interview.
All right, sure. We're live on Kickstarter right now. We've got a few days left. This is our Philippine space opera. It's space opera Pinoy style. We call it Mythspace. And this is the trailer for our Kickstarter for our remastered international edition. For the first time, it will be in full color. And I think we can throw it to the video right about now.
All right. I love it. Let's get into it. Here we go. Check out Mythspace. there you go. That was the Kickstarter campaign video for Mythspace Ignition by the amazing Paolo Chikiamco, joining us to talk all about himself and this amazing project, and for me to be educated into Philippine mythology. I'm so excited. Tina, are you ready to get into this and throw him the first question out the gate?
Yes. So
all right,
Paolo,
let's go.
We always want to know, where are you from? And where are you really from?
I wish I had a more interesting answer, but I am a city boy, born and bred. As you can tell from my last name, I'm Filipino Chinese. Although while the name has remained, that just means that most of my paternal side came from there. But I'm like maybe 1/16th Chinese by now. But you wouldn't know from the name, and you wouldn't know from my wife, who is a pure blood, as they would say. And my family, my mother's side, they come from Nueva Ecija. But for me, that's always just been a place we go to when they think I've been inside the house for too long, and they wanted me to get out in the sun and experience what life was like back then, away from my books and everything that makes me who I am. But yeah, okay, fine, I'll get a chicken's butt if that's what you want. But I've really just basically been born and bred in Manila. I've lived most of my life in Pasig, which is sort of why I have a sort of I love a lot about Philippine culture, Philippine mythology, Philippine folklore, but a lot of this I've had to experience sort of secondhand, like sort of alienated in a way, because when you're in a highly cosmopolitan area, the culture is city culture. It's not really necessarily the culture of one particular community. It's city. You go, like, especially here, you go to the malls. I was sent to a Jesuit school.
Oh my gosh, hold up. Let's pause on that. It's getting interesting, y'all. I love this.
Yeah, because you touched on like a couple different gems here, talking about how they had to pull you away from your books and kick you outside. Like, we're gonna get into that.
So
I love what you're saying about city culture, though, because that reminds me of like New York culture here in America is like, you know, your New York culture is different from like American culture or like from anything else. Like, it's its own beast. So that's really cool that in the same way Manila is like that.
Yes. Yeah, it's also, I guess, a way I have to sort of, if I'm talking to someone who's not from here, because if you're from the Philippines, you know that you can't, like, every culture from outside looks like a monolith, right? Because you don't know a lot about culture. So you know what the first thing that you learned about that culture you believe will apply to everyone from that culture. So but if you're in that culture, you know that's not the case. So usually I have to, especially when people first meet me in the context of they want to talk to me or interview me, it's usually in the context of, oh, there's this guy who knows a lot about Philippine folklore and mythology. You know, let's bring him in. Let's talk about that aspect. And I always have to say, wait, I mean, I know all these things, but this isn't firsthand knowledge. I'm not from an indigenous culture, and I have to be always respectful of the fact that a lot of the knowledge I bring to the table is knowledge that I'm coming at from a third party perspective, even if I'm Filipino. Because just because you're Filipino doesn't give you claim to what the Kangkanais believe. It doesn't give you a claim to what the Manomo believe. But it's just that because I also can't help the fact that because of the Spaniards, we're all considered to be one country, even though without that kind of political drawing of the map, we wouldn't be one people. So even if this is part of my culture, it's not really a part of my personal culture. So I always have to be careful, because I find a lot of what we have here, the diversity of the beliefs, the uniqueness of it. I find it so worthwhile to share with other people, just so that they realize what we have here. But even if I put myself unavoidably in the position of representative of the whole, I always have to be clear that I am sort of being pointing at them, and I'm sort of related to them, but what is theirs is theirs. I'm just
Yeah.
here to sort of like show a spotlight, um, because it has informed part of my identity, even though I don't know it, even though that identity is formed politically rather than culturally or through some sort of bloodline or heritage. So yeah, so that's sort of where I have to. That's the sort of weird relationship I have with even what people would call my expertise. Although I always say I'm not an expert in these things, I'm an enthusiast. I love it, which is why I know a lot about it.
I,
You know?
I feel that so much. I completely
right?
relate with that. And for me, being a Filipino American,
Mhm.
and a mixed kid, and so far removed, having never been to the Philippines, which is a bucket list thing for me. That's a goal, is to visit my homeland. But I feel just so removed from it. And then for people to ask me about our culture, I feel that from a whole nother level compared to you,
Right.
Paolo. It's wild. But
Mhm.
before we get into that, these are great nuggets. That's why I didn't want to stop you to go through like our normal kind of flow, is because I love that information. So thank you. But before we continue with you, what I love to also do to follow up after Tina is to give love and light to the ancestors that came before. I think for us to be here, it wouldn't be for their sacrifice, their struggle. So if you could just tell us a little bit about maybe your mother, father, grandfather, aunties, uncles, any ancestor that you just want to give some love and energy to, maybe something you inherited from them that, which is why you're an author now, were there authors in the past, were there, just any interesting stories that you can pull from before we get into your story?
My grandfather, Paolo Chikiamco, was one of the four pioneers of cancer research here. There's still a couple of departments in the hospitals that are named after him. He treated, I can't remember who, one of the astronauts. I don't know if it was Armstrong or Aldrin. One of them came over and got treatment from him because he was that good. So because and my grandmother Akita was also a doctor, and because they were such amazing doctors, none of us have been doctors. I think
they checked that
I think
box for y'all.
yeah, it's like most people are like, oh, that's why we have a long family history of doctors now. We were like that, we're good. We're not touching
I
that
love it
anymore. We're not touching that legacy anymore. Yeah, there's only gonna be two Dr. Chikiamcos. Well, there are others, but from the direct lineage, like no, we'll just go be your writers instead, or lawyers, or
Yeah,
or
y'all
chefs.
conquered that hill.
Yeah, my cousin works in the States. Actually, he works in HBO. She's Pia Chikiamco. It's easy to know one of the, while my last name has eventually given me problems. It's good that it's unique, because that way, first, it's easy to get my security clearance because there's nobody else with my name. Second, usually if you see a Chikiamco, you know we're related. So I'm really my cousins, that's amazing. But all of this, I'm sorry, is all from my mother's side. I dropped my dad's last name a long time ago because I never met him. My mom is amazing. She's a single parent. I was her only child. She was stuck with me for most of her life, but I think she did fairly well. I'm not sure if she's changed her mind recently, but yeah, it's one of the reasons why, even if we're in the Philippines, is still to this day a very there's a lot of the Catholic influence and Catholic presence, and it's only fairly recently that you're seeing um, progress in terms of what they consider to be your um, family unit, right? So it's something that, but it's something that I've always been aware of because I was all raised by a single mom. So it's something that we've sort of had to fight against um, for a
Yeah.
long time. And the fact that now that I am a parent and I have two kids, I can't imagine how she did it because if I could have five parents, one kid, I would do that. Because I still feel outnumbered even if we're two against two, you know.
Yeah.
So I can't. Um, so yeah, that's and there's a lot of single parents here. Partly because of we don't have divorce,
Yeah.
so people just leave, and when they leave, you can't get married again
Yeah.
because there's no divorce. So a lot of moms end up raising their kids by themselves, sometimes
Mhm.
more than one. And I think my grandparents were amazing because they were doctors, they were amazing doctors. But I think that what my mom was able to do was just as amazing because she was able to raise me alone
Yeah.
in a culture that was not at the time. It's better now, but at the time was not very considerate of family units that weren't your typical. There's a
Mhm.
mom, the dad, there's the kids. So the mom and the dad works, the mom will stay home. So like, of course, she had to do the work. She wasn't staying home, and she was alone. So that's already three strikes against her in terms of the conservative viewpoint. But she did it. I think I'm not screwed up in ways that other people would notice. So that's an achievement.
That's a good one.
That
That's
is
a good
that was a really good answer.
I mean, I need to be straight with you guys, right? I can't say I'm not screwed up. It's not in a way people would notice, right?
We're all screwed up, brother.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so that's for me. Partly because I only know my mother's side. Um, that's for me. That's where all my all my love and my heritage comes from. I had to carry because again of the conservative nature of the culture. I had to carry my dad's name for most of my life.
Mm.
Which is why I guess if someone tries to search me out, I look sort of mysterious because my records don't really start until I became a lawyer. Since I was by that time, I was like, well, I knew I was going to finish law school. I was like, I want to carry this name into the role of attorneys. I want to use the name of the people that matter to me.
Mm.
So, and
Yes.
since I had by then, I decided I wasn't going to run for election. I was like, yeah, okay, I can take that name because it would have been pretty hard getting elected with my name now. People wouldn't be able to
Mhm.
spell.
People would be like,
So yeah, so there. That's my those are the people I owe where I am to in terms
that's
of my
beautiful.
bloodline.
Heck yeah.
Yes.
I love that.
Let's go back to that. Let's go back to uh your childhood and some things that maybe like a young Paolo was into. You mentioned books
Hmm.
before. So what did you do for
Yeah. Because I was an only child, so it's not like I had a lot of playmates or anything like that. So when I started reading, I think when my mom gave up trying to force me to be someone who interacted with other people. Well, she never completely gave up, but when I started getting books, I didn't like when I was a kid, and I guess it goes to my age. Was no such thing as young adult.
Mm.
So once I was done with the children's books, like the next thing I read was like a full blown fantasy novel already. So
0 to 100?
yeah. So I think I even started doing novels before I started doing comics, just because they were more readily available here. Because this was before the comics in the bookstores era. The
Yeah.
comics were in the comic store. They're
Mhm.
not real books. You don't put them here. But all the books that were available were these Western fantasy series
Mhm.
that like went on forever, which I love. but also I guess contributes to my inability to write short, which sort of makes it difficult later on. So when I was a kid, those were the kind of books that I imbibed, inhaled. I think my first was this sort of, you'd call it isekai now, because of the anime stuff. But
You're right.
there was this Joel Rosenberg fantasy series, that The Guardians of the Flame. I remember that. My first introduction, that was before Tolkien. So my first introduction to books was about people swearing a lot, lots of, it was not something I should have been reading, but I read it anyway. It's not like my mom would know. She didn't read this. Oh, there's a dragon on the cover here. Yeah, there's a dragon that eats people, Mom.
And cursing while cursing.
Yeah. Like, I think it describes it in the book. The entrails come out, but yeah, no, it's good. It's a dragon on top. And then there was Tolkien stuff. Robert Jordan was one of the first, and that's not short. Tad Williams books. These were the major fantasy series of like the 90s. I think my favorite at the time was this series called The Belgariad, by David Eddings, which has since been repurposed into young adult books. But at the time, they were these mega fantasy series, and I read them, and it sort of formed my. I mean, I loved them, but I never thought to be a writer, because all these books were written by people in the States, or white people who were dead. So there was no conception in my head that this is a career path that was ever going to be open for me. Eventually started getting into comics. There was this place called Comic Quest at the old quad in Makati where we used to live. And my mom would use comics as her, I guess, because they seemed cheaper than books or more readily appealing. She'd use it to bribe me to do her bidding. So
my mom would do the same thing. I'll never forget that. But I would go hard. I'm like, okay, I will mow the lawn for some comic books. Yeah.
Yeah, no. My negotiating tactic was the opposite. It was like, it had the opposite effect. It just made me more recalcitrant. It's like, the idea if I resisted more, then the carrot would grow bigger. Eventually, right. I mean, eventually, if I pushed too hard, she'd start beating me with the carrot. But like, eventually, I'd sort of be able to read. Okay, I should stop at this point. But like, I wouldn't even have. I think that's how I learned to sleep by myself, because I was a mama's boy, obviously. Because what else would I be, right? And I was scared of the dark. I didn't want to sleep alone. And I think it took. The fear lasted until it was about at the level of 10 comic books per night. And then suddenly the fear sort of like, yeah, I can do this. Strong, comics loving boy. I can do this.
I love it.
So yeah. But again, this is something that even if there was by this time already, we know Philippine creators have been involved with the big comics for a long time. But I wouldn't have known that. This is before Wills and Image. So it was and it was long after the heyday of Alcala and Redondo. So again, it was something that I figured was just not something that people in the Philippines did. So those were my pastimes, and I had categorized them into my head as these are the things that I do for fun. And it was never something that, even if I was passionate about it, and everyone says you pursue your passion and everything, it was, for me, it's like, no, this is stuff that I consume because I'm here. I'm not from there. So they make the stuff and we consume it, because that was everything was there. That's why I think it was mind blowing for me when can I do a little bit of show and tell here?
Yes.
I, in the 90s, ran across this book from Arnold Are. It's called The Mythology Class. This is the original edition. So I was an OG fan before anybody else.
Wow.
So the Alamat is the comics group. I know you had Budget on. and he talked about a comics group that they put together, right, as sort of like the Avengers of Philippine creators at the time after talking to Will. So this is the group. It's Alamat. So this is one of the things that they put out that did go past one issue. I have all four here. These are collector's editions by now because they've been collected. They're in graphic novels now. But yeah, when I first read Arnold Arias' book, I was floored because this was a local comic by a local creator that was good and that involved Philippine folklore. Like, of course, you live here, you hear about aswangs, hear about tikbalangs, but it's not world building when you just hear it like anecdotally.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't stick. When I grew up, when I ran out of the fiction section, I start reading like the mythology books because, like, I guess these are stories, right? I can read them.
Oh my God.
So, but there you get the feeling of the world building because they're all together. They're usually categorized. You can go from the creation. There's a sort of timeline that you go into that. When I was growing up, they didn't have anything like that here with Philippine mythology for good reasons. Because we don't really have. Again, going back, we're not really. It's not one heritage in the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
It's several different ones. So
centralized.
There's no
like centralized stories.
Right. There's no Philippine pantheon of gods that you can sort of put in a book and say, this is the Bullfinch edition of the Philippine mythology. You can't do that. But there are motifs that are shared across the regions, but the expression of those motifs is different in every place. So the positive is it's much more diverse. The negative is it's much harder to teach. It's harder to put it in a form that's easily digestible. So, and the mythology stuff is usually separate from the folklore stuff. A lot of the folklore stuff just came out on its own, divorced from. That's why they have the idea of upper and lower mythology. But mythology class was my first exposure to it in a sort of world building way. That they sort of explain, these are their abilities, this is what they do. And it involved both upper and lower mythology. There were gods and goddesses here. There were the heroes from the epics, and then there were your usual monster type creatures, the tikbalang, the Kataphorric. So, and it did it in a way that was sort of like a portal fantasy. So which was helpful to someone who's like me, who at the time was new to it, was sort of getting to know all these legends and all these creatures through the eyes of characters who also didn't know. So there's a narrative excuse to sort of explain it to them that, this is what a tikbalang does. This is what our Kataphorric are known for. And yeah, it blew me away. I think after that, I didn't start seriously considering writing still until much later on. Because even to this day, it's very, very few of us who can make a living out of it. I mean, I'm not one of them. But the idea was already planted that this was something that we could do, and we could do well, and we could do in the genres that I grew to love. Because when I was growing up, when people wanted to be Filipino writers, they had to write social realism. You had to talk about society, and I mean, these are all important things. And the reason why it was so popular at the time was because there was a need for this kind of these kinds of narratives. But I didn't want to write those things because I didn't grow up reading them. What I loved was fantasy and science fiction, and there was no representation in terms of the creative side who were contemporary. When I was growing up, and in terms of the content too. More so in terms of the content, because you could have a Filipino artist drawing, let's say Batman or Spider-Man, but that doesn't mean that there's suddenly going to be Filipino elements there. It's important to get Filipino creators involved. It's also important to have representation there. It's best when they go together.
Yes.
But at the time, it just was until I saw what Budget, Arnold, and everyone were doing. I didn't know that it was something that was even possible for us. So I only decided that that's what I wanted to do much, much later on.
Yeah. All right. So before we get there, I love all this. That's why I'm not stopping you. Like I said, when we go,
Right.
we're just gonna go. So that what I would assume, well, that would convo would happen with getting to school years. But before we get to those school years and then leading to, how I know you pursued law for a little bit and then you found your love into writing and everything. What I want to touch upon is back to a little bit more the cultural aspects. Being that you born and raised in the Philippines, one of the big things we talk about, because we generally have a lot of Philams and Phil Canadians, Filipinos in the UK, all over, is that realization when you're Filipino. With you being in the Philippines, you already know you're Filipino, I would assume. But I would say another thing that you probably faced more so than quote unquote racism that I think we experience over here as Filipino Americans is classism, rich, poor, all that. What was that like for you growing up as a kid before you get into, your formative year and your education and all that? Did you experience any of that? Realizing who you are, you're not just a carefree kid that has to enjoy stuff. No, mom and dad can't afford this, or you grew up without a father, right? So can you just tell me some of those early on lessons as just a being and growing up,
I think that for me, I'm a child of privilege. I have to say it.
Okay.
We never wanted materially for anything. My mother is by nature frugal with most things, but in terms of what I needed, particularly because I wasn't very expensive until I discovered video games, I guess. But like in terms of just buying book, she just buy me, even if you could buy me a book and I'd be happy, or the time and tested tradition of leaving me alone in the bookstore for a day so I'd finish like 2 books. We used to be able to do that. They frown upon it now, but I used to be able to find a corner and just read. But like I think with me, it's sort of like a fish in the ocean scenario that. Yeah, obviously we knew we were Filipino, but because it's not because you don't start off discovering that, you don't really question it or what it means. You're just there. Yeah, you're a Filipino, but that doesn't seem to mean anything because you don't ever have to be confronted with people who aren't Filipino. So most of my exposure to that actually came from most of the discrimination, I guess you would say. It wasn't really discrimination. It's what I had to be confronted with because of my hobbies and passions was lack of representation. So a lot of people make fun of how we as a society seem to freak out whenever like Filipinos get cameo somewhere.
Oh yeah, we're always like, that is us. That's our
yeah. A
person.
Word gets mentioned and everything, and yeah, it's exaggerated, but yeah, it also goes to show you how starved we are to see ourselves in these kinds of genres and material. Because it's not like, I think people get the idea that if you live in the Philippines, you're not starved for representation because you can turn on and watch a Filipino show or you see yourself. And that's fine. But a lot of us, because of being colonized by the states, because of our proximity to other Asian cultures, so like when anime and manga exploded, we were one of the first frontiers for that. A lot of us love genres which aren't yet really made here. So it's different still seeing there, and there's still a big absence of representation in terms of specific genres that we also enjoy and have a right to enjoy.
Yes.
So that's sort of where you have to start wondering, hey, why aren't we there? Why, when people talk about let's say Asians, we are not there. And that's a Southeast Asian thing, right? That when people talk about Asians, it's like we talk about the East Asians. It's like for Central Asia and for Southeast Asia, like we're Asians too. So
Yes.
it's still something that irks me, and that's one of the reasons why we do what we do in terms of um, the kind of stories that I try to make and that I try to promote and that I like seeing from other people. It's that we want to have representation in the genres that we love by created by people like us. I mean, it's really that simple, and it's still something that is a vacuum. Um, it's getting better now, but we've had to work for that every game. You can ask Budget how hard it was for him to get any FaceTime with anyone who would put Trece over. You know, it's like more representation that there is, the less of a burden there is for those who are representing. Because right now, it's like, since you only see a few instances of representation of Filipinos in in a global culture product, let's say the Marvel stuff or the big anime stuff, then you're risking typecasting and stereotyping. But the more variety there is of that, stories that involve us, stories that feature us, the better it will be for everybody else. When I wrote in the introduction of the anthology I edited, Alternative Math, I said that it always seems like we're a footnote in history. Like whenever we just had Bataan Day,
the
other day, and when you see the worldwide discourse about Bataan, it's all about America. Largest American-led army ever to surrender, blah, 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 blah. If you count the number of American soldiers at the Bataan, and you compare it to the number of Filipino soldiers in Bataan, it's a Filipino story. Yeah. But it always gets brushed under the rug because they're not used to hearing a story where Filipinos are in the forefront. You know, which is why I love stuff like Ned and Spider-Man, the movies, right?
Yes, that was so cool. And that like all of Lola's lines were in Tagalog. Like she didn't speak English, she spoke in Tagalog. Right. It was really cool.
And I'm happy that it was there. And this is how you start to sort of make inroads into telling our stories. But I mean, the idea that we would be satisfied with that is ludicrous. I love it. Don't get me wrong. I love the movie. I love the part she got. But that is not something that's not going to be a stopping point.
No.
Real talk.
No, we want a wave movie. Right?
Right. More than that, you want a movie like Trece that is owned by the creator.
Created by, told by,
and owned by, because that's
absolutely.
The key with something that's creative, and it's what one of the things I took from the late Jerry Alanguilan, who was, I mean, we met a couple of times, but even if we didn't have a lot of personal interaction, I grew up reading like his blog. And one of his essays was about not selling ourselves short. And that's something that I really took to heart even then, that, you can do work for hire. You could do, there are reasons to do work for hire. You love there are a lot of those characters that we grew up loving. There are a lot of, there's money to be made. There's profiles to you raise your profile on a bigger stage. You make a name for yourself. All that is great, but you also have to have something of yourself that you own.
Yes.
You also have to be able to invest in something that you can pass on to like your kid as like a legacy, or that you can make the decisions for as to how it is portrayed, presented. You don't have that when you're working for somebody else. And it's important as a creator that not everything you do is for someone else. You don't have to do everything for yourself. But
Mm.
if you don't have, it doesn't have to be something you publish, but if you don't have something of your own, part of you dies, because that's not what it means for for a creator to. I mean, you have to have that level of freedom with something, so that you can be able to control its destiny. You can be able to really not have any fetters or constraints that you don't impose on yourself. Might not sell, but it'll make you a better creator just because you're able to get it out.
Yeah.
One of the things that I tell younger creators when I don't scare them off is that my approach may be different from another person's approach, but I've always believed that you get better on top of the corpses of your failures. Like you, like as an editor, I sometimes what's important is like your role as an editor is you make something out of what's there. But if there's nothing there, you're helpless. So as a creator, your early body of work might be something that later on you'll be ashamed of about. Like, I can't believe I ever wrote that or drew that. But each time you make something, and you have to make something, it can't just stay in your head. Each time you put it out there, maybe not publicly, but you express it in some form, on paper, in a Word document, whatever, but you finish it, even if it's bad. The more you make, the more material you have to sculpt into something great. Because if you always stop yourself, Jerry would say self-reject yourself, then you run out of the foundational material you need to get to the next level. Because it always just stays in your head because you're scared to put it out. But once it's out there, even if it fails, even if it's not great, you'll know. And you'll be able to, it's not something imaginary, it's there. And because it's there, you can use it to get somewhere else. That's why, like for comics, I write very fast. I go through a lot of drafts and stories, and not all of them are as refined as they could probably be. But I'll do that next time. At least this is done. And then, like, if your work is, at least for mine, is motivated by representation, you can't just wait for it to be like a lot of literary writers who grew up when I grew up were focused on making the great Filipino novel, the novel that would put us on the map, the novel that would truly encapsulate the essence of the Filipino. And they probably haven't put out a single book because they're obsessed with that perfect one being perfect before they get it out. While those who are less, I want to say picky, but who understood that representation involves production, are already in their 10th novel or 12th. I mean, you need to, if you want to represent, you need to make stuff. That's why we always tell people, it's something that Budget also says. Most creators who I've met will also say to the younger creators, just make your stuff. Put it out. It can stink. That's okay. Do better next time. But we're all in this together, in this endeavor of making people realize that we're here. It's better now. And this year in particular, coming off the heels of Trece, I did an article for Comics Beat where I talked about it, that because partly the more immediate trigger is Trece and the Netflix show and its success, we have a lot more people looking at Philippine comics now.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why all these publishers, local and international, are so excited is because for years we've been putting stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
Mythspace, Trece, these are decades. These are like from 10 years ago. You should see the stuff that's out now. And it's like we've been waiting for this moment to capitalize on. And now that sort of Trece has opened the gates a little, you're going to see a lot more. And that's just going to make it easier and easier for other stories to get picked up. And that's what we want. We want to make sure that we're not the only ones enjoying this new golden age. I will call it the golden age. I'm sure others will argue about terminology. Oh, you're not like the masters of old. I don't care.
Tell it.
You need to see the stuff. I mean, nobody I know who is a serious comics critic can look at something like Dead Balagtas, which is this beautiful, beautiful book, and say that it's not a 100% wonderful comic, like on even just a pure craftsmanship level. And then there's the stuff that's being put out that's just regular slice of life things, but that is able to get into the zeitgeist of Philippine consciousness at present. You look at like Ablaze is going to come out with the wordless comics of Manix Abrera. Manix Abrera, which is a great introduction to him, but his bread and butter are his comics here called Kiko Machine, and it's hard to. I mean, it's in Tagalog. It's very dense, but he's able to capture humor, like Filipino humor, in a way that is so. It's one of those things that, good comedy is if the joke is something that you wonder, why didn't I think of that? He does that almost every week, and he is a comics genius, I think. And there are several, I think, now who are actively making comics. You have him, you have Carlo Vergara, who did Jaja Jaturna. You had Mervyn Malonzo, who does Tabi Po, and who's, on a lark during the pandemic became an animator, and suddenly has won directing award for animation because he's a genius. All of these things, like the mythology class comics that I mentioned, Toto will be coming out with an international edition in a couple of months. So all of these things you're gonna start to see, and they've always been there. And most of the things that are gonna come out are years and years old. The stuff now, some of it leaves us in the dust.
I love it,
and it's good, and it's amazing to see that. And one of the things I talk about is that we're not really a comics industry here, partly because for a long, long time there were no comics publishers here. Everything had to be like Bridget talked about, having to photocopy the stories and sell them. That was the norm for decades, and that's why our scene is so diverse, because they don't have that need to fit into particular editorial mandates. It's not like everyone was buying superhero comics, so should we all make superhero comics? No. Like, people who like superhero comics made superhero comics. People who like other things didn't feel the urge to make superhero comics because no one was buying our stuff, publishing our stuff anyway. So we might as well do what you want. And that created not an industry, but a community. So that's why, even if, like, we are the comics community, there are fights. Yeah, there are people who have more sway than others, but there is more of an awareness of the fact that we need to help each other than I would see in another setting. So, like when Budget Stress became a hit, there Stress is not everyone's cup of tea even here. But the response to that success was almost unanimously, this is good.
Yeah.
We have to support it. This is great for us. This is great for them. And we will throw all our weight behind it because we're a community. I mean, you might not understand what your, my I have a cousin who's a chef. I don't understand these things. I just eat. But you're that you don't take that against him. You support him because he's your family. It's sort of that way with us as well. There are some comics that are much too avant-garde for me. My tastes are admittedly pretty mainstream. But
What's wrong with that?
everything I can do to support them, I will. Because we have to pull ourselves up. We've always been the ones pulling ourselves up. And even if more of us achieve success, that's not going to change. Yeah. You see how Budget actively promotes people who, from even if he's all the way in Legoland, he still actively looks for comics from us and promotes comics from us. He's been one of the most active supporters of our Kickstarter. He got Gaiman to retweet it a couple of weeks ago. I mean, because that's who Budget is. That's how we tend to relate to each other. And I'm proud of that, especially because a lot of us had it so hard during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Partly because the response here was not great. Another part of that is because the comics community was so convention centric, and the lockdowns came so suddenly and have lasted so long that it's like such an integral part of it just disappeared. And it took us a while, coming on the heels of Jerry dying in 2019. And the year after Danny Ocampo died, he was the number one comics enthusiast and supporter in the country. Like most people in the community, if you've gone to conventions, they would know him. And that hurt a lot of us in ways we wouldn't even have realized. So it was something that it was rough, but now things are getting better. And there were a lot of online places that picked up the slack. A lot of the conventions, even if it wasn't their cup of tea, pivoted online because they knew, like Comic-Con and Comic-Con in particular, knew that we needed that sense of community, even however we could get it. So yeah, it's something that now where we are, hopefully we are poised to come back stronger than ever and on a wider stage than before, as part of what Mythspace, taking Mythspace to ablaze was about, and going through the process of remastering and coloring it because we wanted to put our best foot forward. A lot of what we publish here starts out as those ashcan things right here. So this is how we originally came out with it. So this was the first issue we had. It's this, photocopied, stapled, everything. So we used to have to $90. We used to have to come out with these for the conventions, and because it was a convention cycle, so a lot of this was done on the side between our day jobs, and a lot of it was rushed to meet. The convention's in 2 weeks, we have to finish it, and then you'll see it in the pages. That towards the end, the pages are like, okay, there's much less detail here than there was at the start. But because you were, again, my entire mentality was, we need to produce, we need to get this out. So, but we knew that. So we were proud of what we did, and we compiled it. It was published, but we knew that if we were going to launch the international stage, it wouldn't do to just have stuff that we what wasn't our best because we rushed it out during crunch time to meet a deadline. And we could never even consider coloring it because like these were photocopied. Color photocopies, we would have made like 3 copies and sold them for like $1,000. So we couldn't even consider that. But now with the Blaze, we knew we could make that jump, which is why we decided to say, okay, if we're gonna do it, let's remaster the whole thing. Oh, let's remaster the portions that we need to remaster, and let's color everything so that we put our best foot forward. Because the story we believe deserves that, and the art I believe deserves that. The artists I work with on Mythspace, and it's always going to be, as a writer, they tend to put me at the forefront because I'm the one who talks. But every story there was co-created. The whole story was co-created. The words are from me, but artists touched every bit of that story. So we are co-creators in the truest sense of the term. So we decided to put that together for a Blaze, and we decided to do the Kickstarter because a lot of us are still, we can't do this full time. But if we're gonna put this out at a reasonable time, then we don't want to have, I don't want to have the artist team wait for royalties to come in, because they need help. If they're gonna take time off to focus on the comic, they will need those expenses front loaded. So that's why we did the Kickstarter, and thankfully it succeeded. So they'll be able to, once it's over and they get the money, be able to take some time off from their other projects and devote it to Mythspace and give it the kind of treatment that it deserves.
Yes. And we're going to return to that in just a second. I didn't want to stop you, Paolo, because as a storyteller myself, you let a storyteller tell stories, and that's what we're here to do, is tell stories. But the main focus, though, is we want to celebrate you as well, Paolo. Like, before you came into this being and came into creating, I'm sure the people that are also watching this, because they tune in, this is ShoPowSho, you're our special guest. We're giving you love and light and giving you your flowers. How did you get to this point where you're creating these amazing properties and you're building up and showing love to this amazing Filipino comics generation that we just been going over the past bit, which I just love. That's why I didn't want to stop you, because there were so many pearls and nuggets of wisdom throughout that. Wouldn't you say so? No?
Yeah, I'm on page 3 of my notes. But take us back. Like, you keep touching on this, that like you went to law school, like you're a lawyer. Like, tell us about what's your day job? Tell us about your day job, and tell us how did you get into this world? How did you then go from, well, writing must not be for me, to writing and publishing a comic internationally?
But before you do that, I want to take it even back a little bit more, if I can, dial it back. Because, a lot of times when we've had other guests on, when you're in school and like high school, we may have aspirations for this, that, and the third, but for quote unquote, Filipino parents, doctor, lawyer, nurse, which we also touched upon earlier, you already had a relative ancestor that already took off the doctor check mark, right? So were you under that same kind of similar pressure? So tell me, from school years formative, then going into Tina's question, what did you aspire in, maybe in high school, before you led to everything else?
My mother just wanted me to make because she was worried about how antisocial I was. But then I guess what finally sort of convinced her that I was okay was that I ran as a lark. I ran for grade school student body president, and I won. So, which nobody expected, but it was just because they did because at the time only the officers from each section would vote, and usually they would do the voting before you do the big bonding activity. But this time they reversed it. They did the big bonding activity before the voting, and I made an absolute fool of myself. I think we were supposed to do speeches about our favorite superpower, and I can't remember what I said anymore, but it was a hit. and apparently being funny means that you can be president. So the only time I never campaigned was when I won. I mean, every time when I campaigned, I lost. So I guess that says something. But yeah, no, my mom was very she just wanted me to be um happy with what I was doing. And I for the most part I gravitated towards things like the law because of I wanted to be able to help make things better for
Mhm.
other people. I wanted to be able to use what talent I had, which was not, um, my anything I had would not be. I mean, I love the sciences, but that wasn't my thing. I was okay in math, but I knew that I didn't like it.
Mhm.
Um, so it was words, and what I wanted to use my words to make things better. And when it comes to a career path, the only real one that was seemed open was being a lawyer. So I took up philosophy at Ateneo, and partly because I wanted to relax before I hit law school, and I loved philosophy. I still do, and it's a acceptable pre-law course. So because you have to take 4 years of a pre-law of 4 years of college before you take law school. So I could have chosen anything, but philosophy was something I really loved. So I took that up for 4 years.
I've got a
Went into law
question that
school.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
go ahead.
that in between all that, because I just got reminded by something you said earlier. You because you wanted to make because you had said something, you want to make things better for the people,
Mhm.
and that's why that helps kind of chart your career path. One of the statements you said earlier is you recognize that you were a child of privilege,
Yeah.
and with books and everything. So to me, knowing that, were you cognizant at that age did that you had that to make you know the difference to want to help others and chart this path?
Yeah, I mean, we were of the generation that was grew up in the wake of the first EDSA revolution.
Mhm.
We knew about I was raised in stories of state abuse.
Mm.
Mhm.
So I knew, and I also was raised on the idea that what I mean, you have to give the state power for it to do its job. But what enables a government to be a government for the people as opposed to a dictatorship is if that power is constrained by law and by accountability. So that is when when you're looking at, I mean, I know that in a lot of societies lawyers get a bad rap. Not so much here. Um, we have our share of TV lawyers, but as a general rule, if you're a lawyer here, you are respected by the community. They
Mhm.
always put attorney in front of your name, even if it makes me, even with my hair, if it makes the hair stand up on my arms. I don't, attorney, it doesn't, it's not something I like. I mean, I feel I sort of shrink inside. But that's just me. But it's something that there's no the whole kill the lawyers thing of Shakespeare. That doesn't really
Mhm.
apply here. Lawyers are very well respected. And it's because there is a view, there is an understanding of the role that law ideally plays in society. So when I w- with when I wanted to make things better, and I knew that the best tool I had in my arsenal was words, lawyers seemed to be a natural fit. It was only later on that I realized it was not a natural fit. Um, because like I wanted when I go into law, I wanted to go into litigation.
Mhm.
Because that was where I felt. I mean, there are other kinds of law, but your closest involvement to law as an instrument of justice comes from litigation. It's also the one where it helps to have a certain way with words. Because you don't need to be eloquent. You're doing things that are very by the book. You don't need to be eloquent if you're being a tax lawyer. You can help a lot of people if you're a tax lawyer, but you don't need to be eloquent with that.
Sure. Yeah.
So I wanted a place where having a way with words would be helpful. Litigation seemed like the ideal place. It's just that there are other aspects to it that you're required to have to be a good litigation lawyer that I had difficulty with. I have difficulty with authority, apparently, which is something I didn't discover when I was with my mom because we got along, you know? Not so much with judges. It's to be a good litigation lawyer here. You can't just be eloquent. You also have to be able to place yourself in a position where you accept that when you're in the courtroom, the judge is the god. You know, if they mess up, you can take them to the Supreme Court. You can file complaints against them and all that. But that's not going to help your client because your client is still gonna have to suffer, and our justice system is very slow. So if you make an enemy of the judge or try to fight too hard against the judge, it delays your client's case. So you need to be able to have that mix of you're forceful, you're eloquent, but you're also can be meek and accepting of the fact that, you know, what the judge says goes. I'm not very good at that.
So what made was it a moment, or was it like accumulation of all of these little moments that you were like, this isn't for me?
It was an accumulation of it. It was my realization that I was never going to be comfortable giving unquestioned obedience to authority, even within the very temporary context of this is only while we're in the court. Outside of court, I can go after this job. I could question it. I can, but even within the confines of this court, I don't have much of a face. So if the judge says something wrong, it's gonna show if I'm annoyed. It's not helpful to my clients, and that's the primary thing. If I think I'm not helping my clients, then I can't be their lawyer.
Yeah.
So I was great at the behind the scenes stuff, writing pleadings. Oh, I could do that all day, every day. Appearing in court, having to deal. So at the time, I was very young, having to deal with a judge who would say that, "Oh, Attorney Chikiamco, are you sure you're an attorney? You look like your mother ordered you to get some patis from the sari store." Ha ha ha. It's like, dude, I went through 4 years in the bar for this, okay? So it was not something that I felt I could consistently do. I mean, eventually when you're older, when you're older than the judge, it's easier. But when getting there, how many cases would I have to not be the best possible representative for to get to that level, right?
Yeah.
And I was also working for one of the largest firms in the country, and I could see the lifestyle and the day-to-day life of the lawyers who were the seniors, the partners, right? And I was like, is that what I want to be doing when I'm their age? Is that what I want my day-to-day routine to be like? Because I can't even with the pleadings, I love writing them, but there would also be the partners with don't spend too much time on that. They're not gonna read it. Don't. But I was like, I want to write. That's what I want to do.
So when did you write? When did you
start writing?
Yeah.
Make that transition and getting everybody together.
When did you make that transition?
Around I'd say in the last years of law school, I began to be aware that there was Manila based group of speculative fiction writers. And they were releasing they at the time they were releasing annual speculative fiction anthologies, My Filipinos in English. This was the group led by Dean Alfar and his wife Nikki, and it was not as big as the comics community, but it was a community here that I felt that I could try to do that. It was just difficult for me because all of my genre love was for novels and series, and I had to really try to unlearn a lot of things. I could write short stories, um, but eventually I was able to submit something there that was published, and I got to meet a lot of people who became my good friends in the speculative fiction community. And while we were doing all of that, um, I there was also it coincided with sort of the rise in ebooks. So this was around 2006-ish. So podcasts were starting to become a thing, ebooks were starting to become a thing, self-publishing was starting to become, because it was always the norm in comics, but in fiction it was like it's a vanity press, haha. So it was frowned upon. But little by little that started to change. So I began to see more of an opportunity for it, for those kind of stories as well. So I would leave. Eventually, when I left the law firm, I decided to put up a website that would cover local comics, local genre stories, and fiction. Because now I knew that there were people writing genre fiction, there were people writing comics. So I thought that there was things that I could cover and things that I could publish on my own. So because of that, I started with my copious amounts of free time already by that time. Since I was out of the law firm. We put together an anthology, and it's still the anthology was still something that I sort of wanted to walk the line between a short story and something longer. So what I did was I made it a themed anthology. So it was basically it was this when it came out here, Alternative Alamat. It's basically I wanted short stories that were reimagined, that would reimagine elements of Philippine mythology and folklore. So that was the theme. We put it together. I put some nonfiction elements at the back and put it out. And because of that, that's where the reputation of someone who knows myth and folklore comes from, even if I'm just an enthusiast about it.
Yeah.
And eventually that led to me covering comics. And one of the comics I reviewed was on the site was from Koy Carrion, who is my lead in Mythspace. And what he did, he was one of the people, because people react to criticism in very different ways here. Because there is not a lot of criticism that goes around. But Koy reacted very well. He actually had me help him edit the comic that he made that I critiqued so that it would be better. And then after that, he came to me and said, "Hey, I know you have connections with the local speculative fiction community. I have a group of artists who want to do a science fiction anthology. Could you set us up sort of like as a literary matchmaking thing with authors so we could make an anthology together?" And I was like, I'm greedy by nature and I'm a fast writer. So I said, what if, just throwing it out there, I wrote everything? Would that be okay? And why don't we? Because again, my upbringing is for stories that have lots of word building, that are longer form. So I said, why don't we make all your different stories part of one shared universe, and we can put them together as an anthology. That way, we can release them at the convention as singles, but when people read them as a whole, they're able to find different layers to the story that weren't there before.
Yeah.
And they agreed, and that's how Mythspace was born. So, and that after that, I was pretty set for doing comics work. So,
Oh, Paolo, this is amazing. Like, you have touched on so many.
I think
so
you
many
found your
different
tribe.
like,
Is really at the
yeah.
end of the day what sitting back and having listened to your this conversation and you giving us your story. You keep on stopping at certain points, which was beautiful. And again, like I didn't want you to stop because to me as a storyteller, you let a storyteller tell those stories, and that's who you are. That's really what your niche was since the beginning. Like you grew up on books. That was your home. That was your safety net, you know, because you weren't wanting to be out or maybe just because you know, like you said, you weren't. I don't want to say you're not a people person, but you just found a different, you know, home within the printed page, right? That was your home, and that's where you feel secure and safe. And then, you know, you obviously transitioned to wanting to make the world better, because I would think that was a reflection of the material you were reading as well. That, you know, through these stories, like that's why I love Superman. You know what I'm saying? You want to have happiness when you live in a world full of despair, you know, or just insanity. So you find comfort in that. And so, you know, you obviously saw, you know, with the legal realm, you know, how difficult and how crazy that could be. And you wanted to be, you know, you already knew that your face was going to show if you're dealing with that judge, you know, so maybe that's not good for you. So it's good on you that you knew for yourself what your path was better for. And then when you found this is where you are. This is where you're meant to be. Because all through this conversations, we get sidetracked because you have a passion for this. And so I absolutely love it. And mythology and our people and our culture. So thank you for continuing to pave that for us and being there on, you know, on the stomping grounds and bringing back Mythspace. And I love this. And I'm sorry if I cut you off, Tina. I know you were getting to a point, but did I echo what you were trying to say?
Yes, that is exactly what I was saying. Just for giving us and sharing with us this this insight into the comic, not the comic industry, but the comic community that you guys have there in the Philippines. It's awesome. And I love that you are very much motivated, like you said, for representation, but then you're very aware of your role and your place in that representation, and in amplifying, you know, the indigenous voices and the origins of these stories, and then also in encouraging your fellow creators to, you know, create. So this is just. Again, I wrote like 3 pages of notes.
Because he's been just dropping nuggets. So I gotta ask you before we get to our last question, before Tina drops it, Paolo, you seem to be right now like already living your dream project by putting out like Mythspace and this alternative alamat that you have getting ready to drop as well soon. I think I was gonna ask you like, what is your dream project? To me, I think I've already heard this answer because you're doing it right now. Would you say that?
Yeah, partly. It's less the kind of projects, and the ones I'm working on now are pretty close to what I would say would be dream project. It's just that I want to do more. Yeah. Like I said, I write fast. I don't want to have free time where I'm writing stories because my kids will just eat that up anyway.
Is there anything you can tease or share with us?
Well, yeah. Another thing that, like I said, there was a lot more attention that got given to us. So one of the comics that we did that hasn't yet seen publicly, because like Mythspace was published locally by Visprint. Pharaoh's Roar was the one that I made with Tina. Chua, who's also part of my Mythspace team. What we did after Mythspace was I sat everyone down and said, okay, your turn now. Give me your dream project. Let's write something together and then let's put it out. So this one was Christina's. So this one was one of the few where we didn't have any Philippine folklore elements involved, but it was important for us to make so that we could show that, you know, it's one of those things that like own voices people get told to always have to write something about like their origins or their ethnicity. We don't need to do that. there's also, like I said, there are different aspects to the representation. There's a representation in the stories, but there's also the representation in the creators. People, Filipino creators, there was a huge debate before about what Filipino creators should concern themselves with writing. And it's like, if you're a Filipino creator, write whatever you want, but write. Because then you're representing Filipino creators, Filipino. That's all that's necessary to fill in that particular aspect of representation. So another story that we made that was sort of solo collaboration from the Mythspace team was with Board Shinaban, something called Muros. So that one is also Hush Hush coming out sometime this year from Tuttle. It will be another remastered version, not in full color, but in sort of a tricolor form. Like we're adding a kind of tone to it. But again, that was one of the work that we really had to cram towards the end. So this one will be much more refined edition, and it's something that like Mythspace was one of my first comics. So I like to think I got better as we went on. So Muros will, I think, it's an alternative history, urban fantasy of what would have happened if, after the Death March, some Philippine sorcerer used all that death to summon a god of the Philippines to help them. But he ends up summoning the wrong god, and the Philippines get sort of locked away from the rest of the world until modern times. And we're the only place that has magic. So it's enclosed by this wall that's called the Muros, from Intramuros city with the walls and everything. So it's a comic that takes place in modern times when there's been that God has been deposed and there's a break in the wall. So you have people from outside coming in, and Manila is sort of like the melting pot where the outside world, all of us who were locked in with magic for the past how many decades, to sort of interact. So that would be Muros with Board Shinaban. That will be coming out sometime this year too.
Something to look forward to. Wow. That's awesome. So Paolo, final question. So we are the NRW, Nerds Rule the World. So our final question is always our nerd check. And this isn't any kind of quiz or anything hard, we promise. We just want to know, what's like your one nerdy topic? What's your one subject or thing that you are just 100% nerd about, that you could give a TED talk on, that you're just super into, either right now or always have been? What are you nerdy about?
Well, I could say Philippine mythology and folklore.
Which
we already know that one. You got to give
we
this
already know that one, so you can't use that one.
Yeah, I figured. Can I say pro wrestling?
Oh
yeah!
Hell yeah!
Oh.
I actually did an interactive fiction novel for Choice of Games that was for pro wrestling, just to show you how much I love the idea of the layering of the stories.
Yeah.
Because like people, a lot of people who talk to have a skewed opinion about it, because most of the people I talked to about it, they were all about just like the attitude and stuff. And it's like, no, that's not it. That's not just it. You have the modern era is much more interesting because you have more access to the behind the scenes stuff, which allows you to layer that into the stories of what's going on in front of you. And the whole idea of kayfabe being dead because you have all these behind the scenes access, it just adds another layer to it, because you don't know anymore because it's one of those things that they're lying, but they know that so are they really lying or are they telling the truth? Right?
Really?
So you do that, but you do that alongside the athletics in the ring. So I like AEW. I'm a big New Japan fan. So that's probably like I could geek out about wrestling storytelling and those for a long time. I could give a TED talk on that. I could do it with my wife, and then we'd argue about our favorites because that's the kind of relationship we have. So
mine has got me into wrestling. So
There you
And
go.
I'm like, I'm super, super newbie, but like, I never understood it. Like growing up, and then even like I would go to Comic-Cons and like my friends are super into it. And I was like, I don't get it. And then I watched like a documentary about it. And then I watched like the first female Royal Rumble. And I was like, yeah, this is, yep, all this is great.
Yeah. Once you get into the storytelling aspect of it, and I love like that, and I love like improv stuff.
Yeah.
So when you put that together, like the need to be able to sort of make things up on the fly and tell stories like with your body, and then go out to the back and tell it with words. It's just so interesting on different levels when it's done correct. When it's not lowest common denominator stuff, it's great. It's especially when you're exposed to different like cultural variations of it, the way the Japanese do it, the way the Americans do it, the way Mexico does it. It's just, and then sometimes you'll get an event where you have Mexican wrestlers with Japanese wrestlers, American wrestlers, and you have all these like they have these long histories of working together, and then you just have to sort of to imbibe that from the match and the commentary. It's there's when wrestling is done right, there's nothing in live performance.
That's great. Great answer. Wow. Yeah. Well, this is again, this has been awesome. And I wrote 3 pages of notes. So we're gonna talk about you now.
Yeah.
But thank you so much again for telling us your story, for sharing your journey with it, and for sharing your community with us.
Anytime I can get the chance to, I do. Especially when it's from people from the diaspora, because I mean, it's one of those things that we need to have more bridges between us here at home and everywhere else.
Which is why we started this podcast, is to reconnect with our roots and to have some kind of, to find that representation and I don't know, the missing pieces.
And it's like we're all in this together still. It's like there's no sense making. I mean, being a Filipino by itself, even if you're here, is such a broad, inclusive identity. Like a lot of people make it so complicated and try to put barriers where there should be none. I mean, if you're Filipino, you're a Filipino. That's all I need to be able to feel that kind of kinship with you or with whoever else. And I think that as Filipinos, we work together, we rise together. That's one thing that across wherever you are, that's something that we do seem to have in common. And I think we should recognize it more wherever those Filipinos may be.
There we go. I love it. I love it. Yes, I'm echoing what you said, Paolo. I'm echoing what Tina said. A rising tide lifts all boats. We say that quite a bit around here, and you definitely feel the same. So yeah, to Tina's points and to your points, thank you so much for coming through. I love that you brought up wrestling to close us out with that last question, because I literally have 2 tabs open on one of my other screens for New Japan Wrestling coming to the area. But then when I just looked at the date, it's going to be coming to my area when I'll be down in Virginia Beach with Tina doing stuff for Tidewater Comic-Con. So I won't be able to go to that event, but there's this AEW event coming that I may be able to make. So I love that. So that's amazing. Yeah. We'll have to probably have you back, Paolo, to talk wrestling, but I definitely want to have you back. As I stated earlier, we'll have some Philippine comic episodes, bringing on some other amazing creators and fans. And so would love to have you on there, as well as, we touched upon Filipino mythology that, is 2 of your passions as well. So again, thank you, Paolo, for all of this great nuggets of information, sharing your story. I don't know if we told too much of your story because, again, your passion for everything else kind of took over, but you dropped some great nuggets of wisdom that I can't thank you enough on. Again, you got up early to do this, to give us your time. Salamat po. Thank you again for doing that. And we want to have you back. So,
thank you for having me. It was an honor, and I was really happy I got to get on the show with you guys.
Definitely. And you're gonna be coming back. You're part of our ShoPowSho family now.
You gotta come back. We just
Come on
scratched
through. So we're gonna talk about you now because you know how these episodes go. We're gonna pause right back after this, and there you go. But Paolo Chikiamco, I'm about to mess up the last name. I knew it was gonna happen.
No,
it was
yeah,
gonna happen
yeah.
again.
That was
Oh, I
fine.
did
That
it?
was great.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
Paolo Chikiamco, follow him. His information will be in the description. And there you go. All the love. Paolo, your boy Kuya P. Tina, there we go. Boom, there you go. That was Paolo Chikiamco with Mythspace Ignition. Alamat, I forgot the opening part of that. Alternative Alamat. Moros, I think, is his other project coming up. But yeah, an amazing creator. What I learned the most was passion from this. You know, we would try to get a story. As y'all know who watched this, we want to tell and give light to these amazing people that are us, that are out there doing it and get their stories, because not a lot of times our stories are told. But then what I saw from this, and as you all saw by watching this, he's so passionate about the things he wants to say through his art, that's where his focus is more so than himself, which is just beautiful. You know, he's all about that. That's what I saw. What about you, Tina?
And I just the two major things that really stuck out to me was that and I'm gonna highlight this in my notes so I can refer to it later. The concept of not being an expert but being an enthusiast. And I just love how he still held space for the original cultures that these stories came from, the indigenous peoples, the Filipinos, and then acknowledging his role, and then by extension our role as diaspora, as Filipinos with Chinese heritage, Filipinos with Spanish heritage, and how we're this melting pot mishmash of a bunch of different nations and a bunch of different cultures that gave birth to what is widely known as Filipino mythology, but is just so much more nuanced than that umbrella term. So that was great. And my second thing that I never, ever, ever, ever get tired of saying or talking about is how important representation is. And then just like, just hearing again this story of like how he had no conception that he could be a writer, and that was something that he could do, and that's something he could do professionally, and then to go and become it and live that dream like is beautiful. And then not only to live that dream, but to thrive and build a community around it. It's great. It's great takeaway.
You love to see it, and that's overtaking him with everything, that he's so passionate about it, that
absolutely
that it goes above and beyond himself. You know, that it's selfless, and it's amazing and inspiring. So shout out to Paolo Chikiamco. Y'all are checking this out. Go support his Kickstarter campaign right now. They've already met their goal, but I think they have stretch goals. But we want to see them get more funding so they can do more and give us great content. You know, I love it.
Yes.
Let's show love and support.
And thank you for saying that, because again, it reminded me of another thing that he said, because we want to support Filipino creators because we loved Ned in Spider-Man No Way Home. We want a Wave movie and more Filipino superheroes in Marvel or DC Comics, but we deserve stories like Trece that are made by Filipinos for Filipinos and about Filipinos. So
real talk. There we go. I love it. I love it. So let's get up out of here. That was another amazing ShoPowSho. But before we go, let's give love to our missing amazing Ate. Shout out to Kataphorric. You can follow her at Kataphorric on everything. And also her podcast, Keeping It Creepy podcast.
Yes. Oh, we never talk about that, but horror from the perspective of BIPOC women, Keeping It Creepy with Cherry and Kat.
There we go. We love you, Kat. We miss you. Can't wait to have you back. And for the amazing Viva Valentina, how can they follow you?
Follow me. I'm mostly on TikTok and Instagram. Just follow me at viva.valentina. I play with stuffed animals and celebrate nerdness. So
there we go. So also give love to the Stuffy Spa. Check her out there. The Stuffy Spa has an IG as well?
No, it's just me. It's all me.
Okay.
Where can they find you?
Hey, you can follow me at the Legend Kuya P on Twitter, TikTok, and IG. Of course, here with Tina and Kat at ShoPowSho. And of course, the home squad of the ShoPowSho at the NRW and at Release Wednesday, where nerds rule the world. This has been another amazing ShoPowSho. Thank you, Paolo Chikiamco. Thank you, Viva, Valentina, and y'all watching. Mahal kita. Salamat. We're out of here, y'all.
Hey everyone, I'm Paolo Chikiamco. I am the writer and co-creator of Mythspace. I am the editor of Alternative Alamat, and both books should be dropping sometime this year internationally. I'm going to be appearing in the ShoPowSho, and I am excited to talk to everyone about Philippine comics, Philippine folklore, maybe pro wrestling. And I can't wait to see you all there. Thank you for having me on. Hi, everyone. I'm Paolo Chikiamco. I am the writer and co-creator of Mythspace. What does being my Filipino heritage mean to me? My Filipino heritage means that I'm always asking myself what my Filipino heritage means. It means never taking for granted being a Filipino, never taking for granted what it means and what the assumptions are about it here or abroad. It means constantly trying to acknowledge the diversity of this heritage, trying to always constantly be aware of what I can do to help others who are also Filipino, who see themselves as Filipino. It's always about trying to make it so that it's clear that we exist, that we are here, that we have a say, whether it be in global culture or in the affairs of the world. We are millions strong and we have a million stories to tell. And being a Filipino, my Filipino heritage, my role in it is to make sure those stories get told.